If everyone could just take a seat, we'll get started. Isn't this an impressive room? It's beautiful. All right, thank you, everyone. I'd like to call the meeting to order and welcome everyone to the 174th meeting of the New York State Board for Historic Preservation. We are at the New York State Museum, and we appreciate being able to use this beautiful venue for this meeting. I want to draw people's attentions to the microphones on the table. They are not amplified, so we cannot hear ourselves through these mics, but they are on and recording. As an important aspect of the public record, I'd like for people to be aware of the microphones and try to use them as much as possible, speaking into them when you're answering a question or addressing the group. And if we could begin with the call to order and roll call, please.
Okay. So Doug Pirelli?
Present.
Jennifer Lemack? Here. Erica Krieger? Here. Paul Stewart? Here. Chuck Vandry?
Here.
Chuck? Not here? Okay. J. D. Lorenzo?
Here.
Winter Aldrich?
Present.
Wayne Goodman?
Here.
Present.
Kristen Aaron? Here. And Lucy Waletsky? Here. Okay. So,
Does Chuck's absence bring a quorum issue?
it's not a quorum issue, no.
Excellent. Next, we'll move to the approval of the September minutes.
I move their approval.
There's a motion for approval of the September minutes. Does anyone have a follow-up comment about the minutes? Second?
Erica?
Erica? All in favor?
Aye.
So then we'll move.
We will move now to the Commissioner's report and introduce Rose Harvey.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm here really first and foremost to thank you all and thank this august board for all and everything that you have done for historic preservation and will do and have been doing for so many years. And I've had the great honor of watching you, learning from you, working with you. My tenure is going to come to an end in January, probably around January 15th. But it's been a job of a lifetime, and I've learned so much from so many in historic preservation. And just a reminder of what our Division of Historic Preservation and our whole agency all joined together have done. It's quite spectacular in the nominations that lead the nation, in the nominations that are more diverse and much more and becoming even more and more in the history of rural New York State, in the history of African American burial grounds, in the history of LGBTQ, all of that. We've taken a lead in deep research of all corners of the state. And obviously the tax credits, we lead the nation in investment, in restoration and revitalization. I think the numbers, I think you're going to talk about the numbers, but $1.2 billion just this year, $4.5 billion since Governor Cuomo began, and we're looking at projects of $6 billion going forward. And also with our own update and upgrade of the the state historic preservation tax legislation in 2013 and just last year, 2/3 of that I think is upstate, which is 80% upstate. It's now 80% upstate, which is really spectacular. Doug, you've brought great new energy on the platform of previous chairs. Thank you. I've watched you already. You're changing process, procedures, and thank you all for your involvement with our awards and much more of what you do all the time. And also with the nominations, thank you. Thank you. I've watched I don't see the piles anymore of paper, which is a good thing. Maybe we're automating.
We are automating.
We're
Commissioner.
automating, but
Even winch.
yes, that's it.
This is true. This is true. I'm automated.
Yeah. When you notice I looked right over when I said I don't see any
You're
piles.
looking doubtfully at me.
But so we really appreciate all your work on all of that. And I just a special thanks to the those here under amazing leadership of Daniel. You know, I also had the privilege of serving with Ruth, but now Daniel and the entire division, it's quite amazing. It's expertise, it's professionalism, everybody's, and all that they do and accomplish, and all of the history that they are celebrating for all of us and teaching all of us. It's just an incredible crew. And so that too, I just want to thank all of you for the great joy and pleasure of working with you. And with everybody here and under this great leader here and this great leader here who Rob leads the charge in terms of making sure our direction is the right direction. We've just got a great future going forward. As I said, we've got many more tax credits, many more nominations. We're giving more dollars to capital dollars to the historic sites for their improvement. We are advancing, and you're going to hear from Daniel on all of this, a new curatorial management system, and then more services to the historic sites, and then looking at special sites for a whole new way of interpreting history. And then I learned yesterday about the burgeoning relationship with the Dutch government for better interpretation, identification of our Dutch colonial history and potential new sites and the existing sites and how we interpret them. We're upgrading, and when I laugh about technology, actually it was historic preservation who led the charge with Chris. Look at John, who was really the pioneer there, and it's, I think, a one-of-a-kind system, cultural information resource system in the country, and also we're going to upgrade it even further, as well as I love the name, our Trekker app for more survey work in the field that will make us more efficient. And the list goes on and on. So it's been a wonderful ride. It's going to even be faster and more exciting and more innovative going into the future. And I thank you all for your role, and I thank everybody in this room and all of our partners. So there you go.
Thank you, Rose. Next item of business is to move on to the National Register reviews, and is our tradition. I would like to ask for the board members to introduce themselves by name, profession, and board responsibility. I'll begin that, and part of the reason here is because we're in a new venue and have so many wonderful guests here, and I'd like for them to know who we are. I'm Douglas Pirelli, Clinical Assistant Professor of Anthropology at the University of Buffalo, Director of the Archaeological Survey, President of the New York Archaeological Council, and Board Chair after serving 2 terms as a board member from Buffalo, New York.
Kathleen Frank, I'm the National Register Coordinator, New York State.
I'm J.D. Lorenzo, I'm the President of the Preservation League of New York State.
I'm Wynn Aldrich. I'm former Deputy Commissioner for Historic Preservation for many years here at State Parks. And for 43 years, the town historian of the town of Red Hook, a portfolio that I surrendered a year ago, to the great relief of the people of Red Hook.
Wayne Goodman, Director of the Landmark Society of Western New York in Rochester.
I'm Kristen Herron. I'm the Program Director for Architecture and Design and Museums at the New York State Council on the Arts, and I serve as the proxy for our chair representing the Arts Council. Erica Krieger. I'm Assistant Director for Variances at the Department of State Division of Building Standards and Codes. I'm representing the Secretary of State.
Paul Stewart. I work for the Community Loan Fund, but I'm here in connection with my role at the Underground Railroad District Project.
Lucy Walensky. I'm Chair of the New York State Council of Parks, Recreation, and Historic Preservation, and also Chair of the Taconic Regional Commission of Parks, who I'm happy are all here today.
And I'm Jennifer Lomack. I'm the Chief Curator of History here at the State Museum and the proxy for the Commissioner of Education.
I'm Rob Hilbrand. I'm the Executive Deputy Commissioner for the Office of Parks, Recreation, and Historic Preservation.
Good morning, Daniel McKay, Deputy Commissioner for Historic Preservation, Office of Parks.
Thank you.
Should have added that I'm Executive Secretary to the board, so that's why I'm seeing the people.
Okay, I've checked with the sound person, and our voices are coming through the microphones fine, so I think we're in good shape there.
Okay, great. Terrific.
Yeah, thank you. So without further ado, we'll start with Bill Krattinger in the first National Register nomination. Thank you.
Good morning. We'll start with two properties in Westchester County. We're going to start with the Robinwood Historic District. It's hard to believe, even in the nearly 20 years here that I've been here, how really the shift in looking at resources post-World War II resources is pretty much well upon us now, as we know. The Robinwood Historic District consists of 21 mid-century modern houses erected as the centerpiece of a unified housing development in the mid-1960s in the town of Ossining, Westchester County, and one pre-existing house which was modified in association with the new development. The houses which form this cohesive housing enclave were designed by Henry Wenning, an MIT-trained architect, in collaboration with developer Marcel Robbins. For the Robinwood houses, Wenning authored designs which were stylistically contemporary and well integrated with their immediate site and natural surroundings. Although the various houses within the district feature relatively uniform setbacks from the road, the relationship to the physical traits of their individual parcels and not their relationship to the adjacent houses was the critical factor in their design and the manner in which they were oriented. Many of the houses are elevated above the level of the roadway and feature consistent landscape elements such as grassy lawns, mature deciduous and coniferous trees, and ornamental plantings. Wenning's Robinwood designs, characterized by their straightforward geometric massing, post and beam construction, and large window expanses, maximize the interaction between the house and landscape, one of their foremost and most enduring qualities. These houses incorporated features necessary for efficient and economical construction with a design aesthetic that reads as clearly today as when the houses were constructed. The Robinwood Historic District is being nominated in association with Criterion A in the area of community planning and development for its association with post-Second World War suburban housing development in Westchester County, and it is additionally being nominated in association with Criterion C in the area of architecture as an intact, cohesive, and significant collection of mid-century modern dwellings erected as part of a comprehensive development scheme to the designs of Wenning in collaboration with Robin. What's most remarkable about this district is, as we look at the original subdivision map on the top, that basically corresponds with our current boundary. This is an exceedingly intact suburban housing development with no intrusions, and really pretty remarkable in terms of its physical integrity. Two of the houses were carried in accounts in the New York Times at the time they were being developed, including 5 Tavano Road, top right, which is a sort of unassuming a facade on the street side, but which opens up into this remarkable, it was described as a ship-like feature in the rear. And finally, the second news item, I think we're looking at moving clockwise from the upper right, 8, 9, and 26 Tavano Road. I have to thank Deborah Van Steen, the architectural historian from the Ossining area. She was the first who really brought this district to my attention and Jenny Betsworth's attention, and really helped contextualize it. And really to the owners, the property owners themselves, who opened up their houses, invited us in, including this 16 Tavano Road, the Sweedlers, who actually worked with Wenning and Robin at the time of the development. So a few owners actually date back to the original mid-60s period of development. So that is the Robinwood Historic District.
Questions or comments from the board? I like the development of the suburban and suburban house context in this nomination. It was really thorough and very well done. You deserve a lot of credit for that. Also, the issue of modernity and just the concept of the subdivision itself was really well developed in this. Do I hear a motion to accept this as recommended for the National Register? Question?
I move. So
Kristen Herron?
Second.
Jay seconds. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed or abstained? Motion carries unanimously for recommendation to the National Register for Robinwood. Bill, next up, please.
Great. Now on to what I will define as my feature presentation for the day. And obviously there's a lot of folks in this room who are pleased to be in attendance, and I'm very much pleased to finally bring this to the State Review Board. This has been a long time coming. I'm going to read from some notes. I'm still getting used to reading from notes. I've done this for John mainly. The Rockefeller Hills, Pocantico Hills Historic District is an expansive historic landscape with accompanying carriage road system that was developed in the later 19th and the first half of the 20th century in Westchester County on land owned by the Rockefeller family. This historic estate landscape portrays the Rockefeller family's development of more than 3,000 acres of land on the eastern bank of the Hudson River on what were once two adjacent estates improved in the later 19th century by John D. Rockefeller Sr. and his younger brother and Standard Oil business associate, William Rockefeller. The signature feature of the district is its system of interrelated carriage roads, which traverses a landscape of remarkable complexity and astounding natural beauty. And if you've been there, you realize these are not, this is not hyperbole. This is really what this place is. This extensive circulation network communicated with the Pocantico Hill Estate's historic core, the area known as the Park, where Kykuit is located, and includes at its northwestern extreme that portion of the estate property on which William Rockefeller's commodious Rockwood Hall villa once stood. The carriage road system as developed on the outlying portions of the Pocantico Hills estate was in large measure laid out beginning in 1910 under the direct guidance of John D. Rockefeller Jr., who by the early 20th century had largely assumed oversight of the estate's development. The carriage roads gracefully progressed through open fields and meadows, bordered by stone walls, alongside water features, and over the contours of elevated hills and ridges. The accompanying landscape is at times intimate and at other times sweeping in character, with the carriage roads being the grand conduit through which it is experienced. Built as a means by which the estate's scenery could be enjoyed by the Rockefeller family, much of the road system was also generously made available to the public at an early date. Today, the public continues to enjoy access to a majority of the remaining portion of the road system and landscape, much of which now falls under the auspices of Rockefeller State Park Preserve, in addition to private land holdings. Just an opening montage, just giving a sense of the variety and the beauty of the estate property, which really is, I'd say it took me about a year to even wrap my mind around this place. It is really that spectacular and expansive. The carriage road system and estate landscape was the result of a 7-decade, 2-generation undertaking during which time the Rockefeller family transformed a disparate patchwork of small farms, private estates, and sundry properties into a naturalistic tract of staggering scale and complexity. This sprawling landscape was sensitively fashioned under the family's direct guidance and with their considerable financial resources brought to bear. Much like the family's former forest lawn estates in Cleveland, the Pocantico Hills estate, with Kykuit as its centerpiece, provided a place of solitude and retreat for the family from its considerable business and philanthropic obligations. It also provided an ideal location for the elder and younger Rockefeller to engage in some of their favorite pursuits, namely road building, landscape design, and equestrian activities. And most of the professionals who came into contact with both senior and junior in this enterprise recognized that this was not a vanity project. These men were fully invested in almost every aspect of the design of this landscape, from the placement of bridges to the capitalizing on particular view sheds. This was an endeavor that was really very much in their hearts. It was William Rockefeller's presence in the lower Hudson Valley that enticed his brother, John D. Rockefeller Sr., to establish his own country seat nearby, which came to succeed Forest Lawn following the family's relocation to New York City. In 1893, John D. Rockefeller Sr. made his first land acquisitions there, amounting to 400 acres. By 1897, the estate had grown to 985 acres, and by 1925, it exceeded 2,000 acres. The historic district encompasses all of the remaining circulation, landscape, architectural, and other features associated with the two adjacent states developed by William and John D. Rockefeller beginning in the later 19th century and extending into the mid-20th century period when work on this grand enterprise drew to a conclusion under the oversight of John D. Rockefeller Jr. In time, the roads built under the latter's auspices would come to communicate with the earlier built roads on the Rockwood Hall estate, portions of which were subsumed by the adjacent Picantico Hills estate following William Rockefeller's death. The nominated estate owes a certain debt to the design theories promoted in the mid-19th century by Andrew Jackson Downing and subsequently by Frederick Law Olmsted, under whose guidance the Rockwood Hall grounds were laid out. And his sons, his successor firm, also worked on the Picantico Hills estate. This area we'll come to see represents, in essence, the upper extreme northwest corner of the historic district and what is the present park preserve. The carriage road system is one of the estate's most exceptional features and was conceived and engineered specifically for the requirements of horse-drawn carriages. It was implemented over the course of numerous construction campaigns, with significant work occurring on the outlying estate during the late 1920s into the mid-1930s. The initiation of that work slightly predates the Rockefeller family's contributions to the carriage roads now contained in Acadia National Park on Mount Desert in Maine. There is a remarkable complexity to the Westchester County road system and its interrelationship with the scenically varied landscape it traverses in terms of the range of view sheds it frames, among them the Hudson River, distant mountain features, thickly wooded hills, open meadows, agricultural fields traversed by stone walls, and lakes, ponds, and watercourses. The Rockefeller Picantico Hills Estate Historic District, inclusive of the remaining sections of roadway, estate landscape, and built features corresponding with the estates of John D. Rockefeller Sr. and Jr. and William Rockefeller, is being nominated under Criterion A in the areas of recreation and conservation, and additionally under Criterion C in the areas of engineering, landscape architecture, and architecture. The remaining estate landscape and carriage road system forms a lasting tribute to the depth of interest which the Rockefeller family took in matters related to nature, landscape design, road engineering, and horse-drawn carriage recreation. As such, it is a cultural landscape of considerable importance, and one which thoroughly documents the notable conservation and philanthropic impulses that made the Rockefeller family among America's greatest benefactors of public park land. It falls probably within a small group of nominations which are visible from space, including CAT's Glimmerglass Historic District. It is truly staggering in scope. The associated tax parcels are shown in the larger map in yellow. It took us quite some time to hone the boundary because at first we were looking at the park preserve land and then came to realize that there were land holdings outside of state ownership. So we were able to navigate that and establish support for the nomination. If you haven't been, it is a must-see without question. Just want to progress through a couple of areas. Here is Rockwood Hall, that part which retains, the villa was demolished in the 1940s, but the podium upon which it sat still remains, as does this wonderful ornamental landscape, which was designed in direct consultation with Olmsted, and I think was one of his last projects. Oh, and I should have, I failed, Kath, I apologize. I failed to orient folks just briefly.
No failure. No failure here.
Hudson River to the left, Bedford Road kind of snakes down through the middle, Sleepy Hollow Road as well, and then the Sawmill to the east, basically. If you've ever been on Bedford Road, you've probably seen this remarkable expanse of open space, very pastoral in nature, stone walls, mature trees. So here we're really, in this vicinity, in the heart of the preserve, really between Swan Lake, which shows in the upper left of the small slide there, and Bedford Road itself. And I remember my first experience of leaving Swan Lake and coming up over the hill and being confronted with this just incredibly dramatic expanse of open space. It's hard to believe it's in where it is, as close to the New York metro area. Cantor Alley, another sort of iconic part of the trail network, lined on one side by mature sycamores and a stream which sort of meanders alongside it. You find these small things in the estate that show everything was so carefully planned in that the adjacent bridge, which separated the pedestrian and the vehicular traffic, actually had a small aperture to allow that stream to pass underneath it. So really no detail was left unattended, let us say. Vicinity of Eagle Hill, as well as the Pacantico River, where a number of these wonderful bridges I'll talk about in a moment are located. And again, just this dramatic, incredibly wonderful landscape. The lower slide, as I say, it's very hard to believe you're in Westchester County. You feel like you're somewhere a world away at times. And also Swan Lake, known as New Lake, which was actually engineered and built, and one of the few occasions where JDR Jr. actually mildly complained that, to effect that, had we done this right the first time, it wouldn't have cost me twice as much. But it was one of the few times in which really the relationship with the people the engineers, the workers, was always a really wonderful association. There was tremendous respect between the Rockefellers and the people who worked for them. And finally, the Eastern Escarpment, which is the part really towards the Sawmill River Parkway, where we see really some of the more significant engineering that had to be built, retaining walls, and the ubiquitous Rockefeller teeth, which are the stones, of course, that line the roadway, a protective and an aesthetic feature. So prior to this, really only the 250-acre portion of the Rockefeller estate, including Kikett and the Playhouse, had been designated. So we had this whole vast outlying area of the estate, including the farm barns, which were built in consultation with the architect Grosvenor Atterbury in the early 1930s. That has now been added to the fold. And of course, one of the truly signature features, the bridge is designed by the architect Charles Stoughton, who had gained note for the bridges he designed in the Bronx River Parkway and quickly found employment both here and on Mount Desert Island as well for the family. We have probably more letters of support than I can name, but from members of Congress, from the state assembly, from the state legislature, from local and county officials, from Pace University, from the National Trust, and I've probably left out a few. George, I want to thank you and the Friends for all the support you gave me during this process. There were times I wasn't sure we'd be able to pull it off, but I appreciate all your support very sincerely. And I also want to thank the park, because every time I needed something, the preserve was there to whether offer me transportation or whatever it might be. I'd also like to thank the park. So that is the Pacantico Hills Historic District.
I know we're going to hear from, we have people going to speak from the Friends and from the Taconic State Park Commission, but I just want to take a half a second, only because Bill mentioned the word apology, to compliment Bill, because the way that he translated this this physical landscape into prose was truly beautiful. And for those of you who haven't been able to read the nomination, I encourage you to do so, because he really captured its spirit on paper and in words, and he wrote a very beautiful description and significant statement, so I just want to counter any hint of a modesty or apology that he offered there, and I know we have people.
Yeah, we certainly would like to invite anyone who'd like to go to the podium and speak
Linda,
about
you
this.
want to introduce, where's Linda? You want to introduce, we're very honored to have the Taconic State Park Commission with us today.
So, thank you very much. I'm Linda Cooper. I'm the regional director for the Taconic region, in which both the prior nomination and this nomination are in. George Gamina and Evelyn Haddad from the Friends of Rockefeller State Park Preserve are here, and George and Evelyn have been sort of driving forces on the nomination. And George was the founder of our Friends group, and I believe if you would like to start off saying a few words on behalf of the nomination.
Sure. First of all, I'd like to thank the commission and Commissioner.
Would you step up to the podium if you don't mind, so we get a nice record of what you have to say? We certainly appreciate it.
First of all, I'd like to thank the commission and Commissioner Harvey and the Office of Historic Preservation, and of course Bill and our regional director Linda Cooper and Tom Watts for all their support. This designation, first of all, I'm the founding president of the Friends of the Rockefeller State Park Preserve. I founded it 22 years ago in memory of my Aunt Peggy Rockefeller. And she was a driving force and taught me many, many things about these carriage roads and the property. So when she passed away, I felt, that I needed to do something, and I went to my cousin Lucy's father, Uncle Lawrence, first, and Uncle David to say, is this something that they would agree upon? And they said, of course, absolutely. So then the Friends then began, and it was a wonderful legacy to to my aunt, and I just wanted to tell you all, first of all, thank you, the Commissioner and all of you for doing this project for us. And I believe that this designation is not only important to Westchester County, it's important to the state of New York, and also to the nation, and also to the legacy of our family, because this means a great deal to all of us. So thank you very much, and whatever I could do to continue, I'm happy to do, because this is something that in my heart, I could just basically bust in tears now, because this is like 20 years in the making. So thank you all very much, and we all appreciate it tremendously.
Lucy, you have
What's her name? Rob?
Linda.
You want me to go up? I can talk here or there?
Oh, please go to the podium.
Lucy, wherever you want
Lucy,
to talk.
please.
But
first, I want to echo the thanks for Bill in doing such an incredible job on this nomination. He worked so hard and so creatively, and as Cass said, the way he's written it up is truly fantastic. And George, thank you for having the vision that this was necessary, and why I wanted to explain why it is so necessary and why I hope it will be passed is it is an artistic vision which of JDR Senior and Junior, and it really shouldn't be tampered with. Any park manager or other who might have an idea the road should be narrower, it should be wider, it should turn into a country path, that can't happen anymore. And the other reason I'm so glad is that the habitat for the deer and the birds and the other wildlife will not be further fragmented by more roads, because it's a complete artistic design, and it will stay with no further fragmentation of habitat. So those are the two main reasons why I think it's really important that this designation is being presented to all of you, and we would be very excited if it's passed.
Linda Cooper, would you be willing to introduce the commission as well?
The commission members, sure.
Please.
So the members of our Taconic Parks Commission are here today, as we are also having our meeting, and forgive us if we leave early during these proceedings to go to our meeting. So our chair is Dr. Lucy Rockefeller-Wiletsky, who is also the chair of the State Council of Parks, and you just heard from her on the designation of the landmark. And we have various members of the commission here, starting by in the order that you're sitting. Frederick Osborne, to the rear, is a member of the commission.
You want to stand up so they can see you?
Stand so you can be recognized.
Okay. Edgar Masters, Randall Fleischer, Arthur Gellert, J. Henry Neal Jr., and Mr. Ralph Odell is not able to be with us this evening. And we have some of our staff members from the Taconic region, Ray Doherty, our General Operations Manager, Thomas Watt, who's the Assistant Regional Director, and Garrett Jobson, the Capital Facilities Manager for the region. So thank you for the opportunity to be here and to speak before you. One of the things I wanted to just commend to the board is that this is an incredible cultural landscape. And thank you for honoring that, for honoring the accomplishments and the vision of both John D. Rockefeller Jr. and Sr., as well as William Rockefeller, but also all the other members of the Rockefeller family that have contributed land, that have helped keep this property in the state that it is, and have actually allowed the public to be there for many, many years, even before it was named as a state park preserve. So to honor that family for what they have done to preserve this section of the county is very special. It is a bucolic area. It is an area that gives sustenance to many in need. It gives, the carriage roads are restorative. I don't know how else to put that. It is a marvelous place to walk through. It's always dicey whether you get the number right, but about 50 miles of carriage roads that are winding around the area, and each with a very different feel to them. And as you go to Rockwood Hall, which again, as you heard, the design was overseen by Frederick Law Olmsted, to see the bygone era of the mansion with the stone foundations there, but right above the Hudson River, and have the specimen trees that are around that property. It takes your breath away, and it has done so for years, and we're pleased that it's getting the recognition that you all will do, and we urge an affirmative vote. Thank you.
Thank you.
Discussion?
Questions or comments from the board about this nomination?
You must have some.
Win, please.
Very briefly, the intersection of culture and nature is very often, and in this case very clearly, that part of our world that most certainly engages the affection and the inspiration of the people. And I think that it is very appropriate that this has been proposed for national significance, the only one on today's agenda, and one of the very few, in fact, during the year. And I think that we can look forward in time to seeing it designated by the Secretary of the Interior as a National Historic Landmark. It would be well-deserved, and all hail to you, Bill, for a masterful piece of work.
Hear, hear. Other comments? Would anyone like to make a motion?
Lucy?
Lucy beat you to it.
Lucy.
Lucy beat you to it. Lucy Wiletsky, and Win seconds. All in favor? Aye. Opposed or abstained? None. Unanimous. Daniel, please.
Bill, would you stand up again? Bill Krattinger. Thank you. No, stay up.
Guilty as charged.
Stay up. Stay up. On behalf of the staff, your colleagues in the unit, the staff as a whole, we know what your enduring commitment to the research and writing of this nomination. This was a technically challenging nomination. It is likely unique nationally in terms of the complexity of transferring landscape to paper format. we had, you reached out to numerous colleagues, both in the agency and beyond the National Park Service, and you have endured and you have prevailed, and we thank you for that. So.
Good morning.
On to the next nomination.
So we are going to cross the Hudson River.
Crossing the Hudson.
To
Ashokan.
Ashokan. So the Ashokan Field Campus Historic District is a multi-component environmental camp and retreat center assembled in 1957 on approximately 360 acres of land on the Esopus Creek, just downstream from the Ashokan Dam. The historic district is significant under Criterion A in the areas of settlement, industry, education, and recreation, and under Criterion C in the area of architecture for its illustration of several centuries of continued development in the Catskill Mountain region. Most of the property is second-growth forest, with a historic core reflecting the district's layered history, beginning in the late 18th century with the Winchell Farm and the Winchell family's industrial development of Winchell Falls, followed by its use in the early 20th century as for wood pulp manufacturing by several prominent companies, and finally by its mid-20th century redevelopment as a camp, applying an early, innovative outdoor education program affiliated with the New York State Teachers College. The site takes its primary statewide level significance from this last period of development and its early and enduring role in the development of outdoor education in New York State. The property was initially settled during the late 18th century by the Winchell family, who established a tavern and grist mill on the site. Embedded in a hillside, it incorporates its basement in a 3-story facade with a 2-story porch, characteristic of roadside inns of the period. Although its federal period form and general appearance are essentially intact, the house was extensively restored in the 1930s for use as a country retreat. Following plans provided by Teller and Halverson, a Kingston architectural firm specializing in the restoration of historic houses for second homes, the house was renovated in the colonial revival sensibility of the period, featuring a regional taste emphasizing ceiling beams, wide board floors, and a natural finish, and modest white-painted interiors and exteriors. During this period, a new barn for a hobby farm was constructed on an older barn foundation on the site. During the 19th and 20th century, the site of the original Winchell Mill was converted and expanded to produce wood pulp for newsprint. A series of companies, including International Paper, the Eastern Dynamite Company, and the DuPont Corporation, owned the mill, which continued to thrive until the construction of the Ashokan Dam reduced water flow to the site. The Ashokan Field Campus is significant at the state level for its association with the early development of curriculums for outdoor education within New York State educational institutions, both at the college level where school teachers were trained, and in elementary schools where the principles and techniques were applied. John Dewey's progressive educational philosophy emphasizing experiential learning was reinvigorated after World War II with a movement to expand classroom learning to the outdoors. The core philosophy and practice of outdoor education included a general move toward outdoor recreational activity, a general reaction against existing classroom education practices, a desire for a greater role of pragmatism in education, the need for conservation education, the need to preserve and promote a democratic ideology, an interest in experimenting with new approaches in education and seeing the benefit of reintegrating schools with their communities. New Paltz College, a state teachers college with a campus school for student-teacher training, acquired this property in 1957 to integrate outdoor education into the college curriculum. Inspired by other educational camps, college president William J. Haggerty had been planning to establish a facility for decades with the aim of introducing students to the principles and methods of outdoor education and providing elementary students at the campus school with new experiences. Merrill Archer developed the initial program, which was expanded in 1965 when Kent Reeves was hired as the first full-time director. Reeves intensified the school program and added cultural history and traditional crafts to the curriculum. He created a small farmstead, introduced farm animals, and constructed new buildings and outbuildings using historic designs and construction techniques derived from American landscape painter and folklorist Eric Sloane's books to house a traditional crafts program. Reeves constructed a replica log cabin on the site of a historic one that had burned and took an interest in historic buildings, like a stone schoolhouse here in the corner, which he dismantled and moved to the property in 1985, and the previously National Register listed covered bridge, which had been moved to the property in 1939. Each of these resources helped facilitate different educational programs and experiences at the camp. More recently, new compatible bunkhouses have been constructed to serve continuing programming. The camp, now known as the Ashokan Center, continues to offer outdoor education and craft history programming based on this foundation, as well as an expanded series of cultural events for adults and families throughout the year. So the nomination for this project was prepared by consultant Neil Larson. We have received one letter of objection from one of the owners, New York City Department of Environmental Protection. We have received letters of support from former DEC Commissioner Joe Martens, documentary filmmaker Ken Burns, that's a new one, and Tim Jensen, a teacher at a private school that sends students to the Ashokan Center. We do have visitors in the audience today from the Ashokan Center, Jay Unger, Molly Mason, and Rosemary Nichols, and I invite you at this time to speak.
Please, go to the podium, by all means.
I want to thank you all for considering this nomination. It's a place near and dear to the hearts of many. There are many people who have come through the Ashokan Center. It was the Ashokan Field Campus for many years, and had life-changing experiences there. It was owned by SUNY New Paltz, as was mentioned earlier, and this year marks the 10th anniversary of it being an independent nonprofit. And it's been totally important and a high priority to keep the school programs not only alive and going into the future, but to have them be relevant for the 21st century. And the fact that we're now learning more about the history of the property will enhance our living history programs for children. It's mostly 4th, 5th, and 6th graders who visit with their schools. We've estimated that over 200,000 have done so since the 1960s, and it's several thousand a year going forward. One of the things for me has been that this process has enriched my knowledge and my interest in the history of the property. I've learned a lot about it, and there are many anecdotal things that have happened. A young man who lives across the street, who was in high school at the time, became very interested in the history of the property and started to try to help gather information for Neil Larson. By the way, thank you, Neil, for all your work on this. Thanks so much. His name was Wilbur Eagleston, and one day he brought to the property a man in his 90s named Sheldon Boyce, whose mom grew up in the original log cabin that we've replicated there. So we took him for a walk around the property and got some reminiscences and began collecting a bit of an oral history and photographs from him. So as time goes forward now, we're going to create better signage and more authentic information about the property's history for the school kids who visit and for the many other visitors at the many public events we now hold. Just have a couple little notes here that I want to not miss. Oh yeah, this is just, I'm not sure exactly that this has anything to do with the nomination, but about a year ago, a man came to us and told us that he was the 6th generation descendant of Lemuel Winchell, who built that lovely building that you saw there. And he's now our on-site caretaker and lives on the property. His name is James Williams, and his brother Michael is our sous chef in the kitchen. And recently, what is that tune?
Well, I like the song, but it's not my phone.
Someone wants to rock and roll all night, party every day.
Yeah. One of the residents of property that's
It's the Russians. Is it?
What's that?
One of the things that we're now doing with the center is making it available for events that relate to sustainability, environmental education, and history. And we had a recent presentation by a woman named Kate McLaughlin, who's a 12th generation resident on adjacent property and a fine artist and president of the Woodstock School of Art. And she presented a program on the history of the building of the reservoir, which gave incredibly more depth to the social and cultural side of what happened when that was built. It was attended by a standing room only audience, many of whom were descendants of people who had been displaced, and others were weekenders who knew nothing about our local history. So it's just an honor to be able to be part of something that continues to educate people of all ages. So thanks for considering our nomination.
Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Rosemary Nichols. I'm an attorney, and I have been a volunteer and a board member for the Ashokan Foundation and the Ashokan Center since before they existed. I came here today prepared to rebut some portions of the DEP letter opposing this nomination based upon some of the decisions that went on and the documents that were prepared when the property was transferred. But I'm glad to hear from Commissioner McKay that DEP has now withdrawn, or whatever it is that one does in terms of opposing a designation as a property owner, because thus far we have managed to get along fairly well with DEP. And that's not a trivial matter in the Catskills. When the property came to be available from the Ashokan field campus, there were two entities that wanted it, Ashokan Center and the DEP. DEP wanted it for water management purposes. They call it the waste channel that flows out of the bottom of the Ashokan Dam. The rest of the world calls it Esopus Creek. We wanted it because it was used, as is indicated at that time, for more than 40 years and now for more than 50 years as an outdoor education center with a lot of historic uses, the backstory, and also because it includes the 30-year fiddle and dance program that many of us have grown to feel as part of the fiddle and dance family. So we recruited the Open Space Institute to help us divide up the land, because that's not an easy, I mean, those uses could be completely incompatible. The deal that was finally struck, again with the very able help of the Open Space Institute, was that DEP would have the part of the land that's related to the Esopus Creek. Ashokan's Foundation and the Ashokan Center would have all the rest of the land, but there was an agreement made, since so much of the educational program that already existed on the site would be on land that would now be entitled to DEP, that functionally the land use would belong to the Ashokan Center, even though the land itself, belonged to DEP. And that's all documented in the Ulster County Clerk's Office. So functionally, in August of 2008, DEP gave away all of their rights on that property, or transferred them, with the exception of the right to manage for water. So there's nothing that this designation could conceivably do that would inappropriately interfere with the uses by DEP of that property, because the rest of it is ours. Thank you.
Rosemary, thank you for those remarks. There has been correspondence between our office and New York City DEP on this nomination. It concluded yesterday with a conference call with attorneys with New York City DEP. They, as a result of that call and significant input from State Preservation Office staff and really going through a checklist of questions and concerns that DEP had, they made a decision not to attend today's meeting and not to register any further objection to the nomination at this meeting. The board did receive the correspondence from New York City DEP, and I just want to note that that any property owner, in this case, most likely DEP, does have the right to appeal this board's action to the National Park Service within 60 days of our submittal of the nomination to the Park Service. And so as of the conclusion of yesterday's conversation, they retain, they certainly noted that they retain that opportunity, that right. So that's where things stand, but they did choose not to attend today and did not request postponement of this decision today, and did not request postponement of the consideration of this nomination, nor postponement of the decision today by this board. So that's where things stand with CDDEP.
Thank you, Daniel. Questions by the board regarding this nomination? Please.
I just want to say that I thought this was a clear, contextualized nomination for historic district, which is just on par with other historic districts. So when we're ready, I'm happy to make the nomination.
And I just want to give Jennifer her props for doing such a detailed history of the outdoor education movement and to making the consultant and presenting that to us, because it's really about the property in its entirety, not any of the individual structures.
Yep.
Wint?
I'll just say that the memorandum that Kath and Jen prepared in response to the legal fusillade from the city it just blew them out of the water. It's terrific to read, and I'm not in the least surprised that they are withdrawing with their tail between their legs.
Wow.
Jennifer?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that there is currently an exhibit downstairs on the first floor based on the Woodstock Art Colony, and a lot of those artists that are represented were inspired by this exact landscape. So if you have time, you should check it out.
I believe Kristen wishes to make a motion.
Yeah.
Do we have a second? Wint seconds it. Kristen and Wint. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed or abstain? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. I believe the Taconic folks are going to leave, so we'll give them a minute to clear the room.
Thank you very much.
Yep. Thank you for attending. Thanks so much. Thank you. Okay, we're going to start up again. Bill, are you doing Hotel Saranac? Yeah.
I'll ask Michael.
He's here. Okay, folks, if I could have your attention, please. We're going to do the fourth nomination now, which is the Hotel Saranac.
Great, thank you, Doug. Hotel Saranac, constructed in the mid-1920s in the village of Saranac Lake, Franklin County, ranks foremost among the village's most recognizable and iconic historic buildings. Erected as a state-of-the-art fireproof hotel edifice, the building was designed by architect William H. Scopes, a principal in the architectural office of Scopes and Fostman, and a major investor in the project. The nominated hotel is of steel frame and reinforced concrete construction with an exterior veneer of red brick and cut limestone dressings. Stylistically exhibits a restrained exterior executed in the classical revival style in concert with more ornate interior spaces, including one, the second floor lobby, the Saranac Hotel's principal and most impressive public room, the design of which was drawn from a specific Italian Renaissance source. The nominated building's 1920s design included 100 guest rooms, large public assembly spaces, and ground floor retail spaces. Today, the Hotel Saranac remains largely as built in the 1920s, with many of its principal spatial and finish features intact. It has recently undergone a certified tax credit rehabilitation and has been placed back into active service. Of course, we begin with a historic view. The building in large measure continues to reflect this design intent, with the exception of the loss of that sort of high parapet with those balustrade panels, which has been lost. The hotel was prominent among a number of early 20th century buildings which were designed by the regionally prominent firm of Scopes and Fostman. Plans were initiated in 1925, construction largely occurred in 1926, and the new hotel was opened to the public in July 1927. It was envisioned by Scopes as a true city hotel, equipped with modern innovations such as private baths for every one of its 100 guest rooms. The building's interior belied to some extent its more sedate exterior treatments, with imported marble staircases, ornamental wrought iron railings, and marble terrazzo floors. The appearance of the large second-floor lobby was inspired by the decorative elements of the grand salon of the 14th century Davanzati Palace in Florence, Italy, which was restored in the early 20th century. The Hotel Saranac remains an excellent example of an early 20th century American hotel and is being nominated in association with Criterion C in the area of architecture. It is additionally being nominated in association with Criterion A in the area of community planning and development, as the project was backed by many prominent Saranac Lake citizens who vigorously encouraged and financed what would become the region's first state-of-the-art hotel. Brief sidebar, about 5 years ago before this rehab, I visited this building with Jim Warren, formerly of our tech staff. It was the coldest site visit ever. It was -12 inside the building. But what I remember more than that was Fred Rodell, president of Rodell Companies, was there with us, and he wasn't wearing a hat. So Fred, wherever you are a tough man. View of the main lobby and a few views of what was the original dining room and one of the characteristic guest rooms. We have a letter of support from the village trustees, and I also want to thank Kim Alvarez of Landmark Consulting, who prepared the documentation, and that is the Saranac Hotel.
Questions from the board? Comments?
Wayne.
Wayne?
That's going to make the motion.
All right, we have a motion from Wayne to accept. Second, Paul? All in favor?
Aye.
Great. Thank you.
Opposed or abstained? None. Unanimous.
As you likely know, the building is on our awardee list this afternoon. We look forward to that.
That's right. That's right.
I'm going to jump south to the Triborough Hospital for Tuberculosis, also known as the T Building, which is significant under Criterion C as an excellent example of Art Moderne hospital architecture. The imposing 9-story brick and limestone building was designed in 1937 by the office of John Russell Pope and completed by its successor firm, Eggers and Higgins. The noted hospital architect, Isidore Rosenfield, oversaw the construction and is likely to have contributed to both the planning and detailing of the medical facilities. The T Building is also significant under Criterion A for its role in the treatment of tuberculosis at a critical time in the history of disease in New York. The hospital was built during a campaign of public tuberculosis hospital expansion led by pioneering New York City Commissioner of Health, Dr. S.S. Goldwater, under Mayor LaGuardia. The hospital was planned just a decade before the antibiotic streptomycin was proven to be the first successful cure for tuberculosis, and was completed in 1941. The design, described as bending forward as if to catch the sun, adhered to prevailing contemporary practice in tuberculosis treatment, which called for ample patient access to light and air. In addition to the balconies running the length of the building, the rooftop design also has these large decks. The building is built near the top of a hill to catch the prevailing breezes, and the hospital is oriented to the southwest to maximize the access to sunlight on a relatively constrained site. The T Building's Art Moderne design was unusual for an institutional building of this scale, but as an example of functional modernism, the style was entirely appropriate for highlighting the modern treatment methods available at the 557-bed hospital. funded in part by the Public Works Administration and constructed with Works Progress Administration labor. The T building embodies the public commitment to health and welfare programs in the New Deal era. This building, just like the hotel, is the focus of a tax credit project and has an approved Part 1. Currently, the first floors are in use by Queen's Hospital, and the upper floors are really just sort of vacant. And I've got some of these wonderful photographs taken soon after the completion of the hospital to sort of show against how it looks these days. A lot of these partitions and the wards are still there. And here's one of the solarium spaces. I'll end with that lovely shot. So we do have a letter of support from New York City Landmarks Preservation Commission. The draft for this nomination was prepared by Carrie Culhane, who is here in the audience today. So if you would like to say anything on behalf of the project, you are entirely welcome to.
Thank you. First, I have to thank you for your excellent editorial skills and helping guiding this nomination to where we got it to. This has been a really great project because prior to my clients taking this over to create affordable housing, this was threatened with demolition. So this was really an exciting project because it will bring back to life one of the most unique buildings in Queens, if not in New York City. So thank you.
Thank you.
So the plan is for affordable housing?
Yes, it is.
Oh, that's wonderful.
It's supportive. It's 100% affordable, formerly homeless families and low-income families.
That's great. The detail, the level of detail in this nomination form in terms of the history of tuberculosis with reference to the specific New York City context, the architects, it's just an amazing form. It's just beautifully done. Other comments from the board? Please.
What were they planning to do? What were they planning to do in this place?
Queens Hospital Center was going to demolish it. Queens Hospital Center was going to demolish it. So it's owned by Queens Health and Hospitals Corporation, and so my clients are leasing it on a 100-year lease. So it's still going to be owned by the city, but the city's intention was to knock it down because it was just.
And do what? Do you know? And just do what?
Have it
Parking lot?
not be, yeah, have it not be something they had to manage.
Do I hear a motion? Jennifer Lemack. Thank you. Jennifer, a second. Kristen Herron. Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Any opposed or abstaining?
Aye. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, number 6 is the Monarch Knitting Company factory in Buffalo. I know we're heading west.
We're heading to Western New York for a little while here from Eastern New York State. So this is the Monarch Knitting Company factory, which is significant as an example of a semi-mill constructed former textile mill located in Buffalo. The Monarch Knitting Company factory is important for housing 2 locally significant industrial firms, the Monarch Knitting Company and the Spencer Lens Company. The Monarch Knitting Company, a Canadian textile firm that specialized in knit sweaters, built the factory as their Buffalo branch between 1912 and 13, and it occupied the building until 1923. During this time, the company steadily expanded the factory, doubling its length in 1916 and adding a 4-car garage in the same year. In 1918, the firm added a dye house, storehouse, and boiler plant. After 1923, the factory passed through several short-term owners until 1926, when it was purchased by the Spencer Lens Company. The Spencer Lens Company specialized in the design and manufacture of optical instruments and was one of America's first optics firms. In 1938, the company built a large plant in nearby Cheektowaga, but continued to occupy the Monarch Knitting Company factory until 1946. Both companies used the building primarily for manufacturing, with offices on the first floor of the 1912 section fronting Dote Street, which is towards the top of the image there. So the Monarch Knitting Company factory is significant under Criterion A in the area of industry for its association with these 2 notable companies. The factory was Monarch Knitting Company's only American textile mill, and for 10 years played a crucial role in developing the company's business in America. The firm used the factory to dye wool, knit sweaters, and ship products throughout the United States, and by 1918, the factory housed all of the company's industrial processes. The Spencer Lens Company, which purchased the building in 1926 and converted it into an optics factory, Discovery and Research Center. The firm developed and manufactured optical devices such as microscopes and telescopes in the factory, and between 1926 and 38, the factory was the Spencer Lens Company's sole production facility and corporate offices. In addition to producing optical devices for civilian use, the Spencer Lens Company supplied the American military with range-finding devices, medical equipment, gun sights, fire control tools, and other optical instruments during both World Wars. So the Monarch Knitting Company factory is also locally significant under Criterion C in the area of architecture as a good representative example of an early 20th century textile mill. Very few large-scale textile manufacturers operated in Buffalo, and the Monarch Knitting Company factory stands as a rare example of a mill in the city. The factory uses semi-mill construction, a construction method that maximized the space between wooden support columns and provided support for the heavy weaving machinery. In addition to its intact semi-mill construction, the factory retains many features associated with textile mill architecture, including a heavy timber frame support system, fire doors, stair towers to reduce fire risks, and long banks of windows to maximize light exposure inside the factory. The factory also contains important secondary spaces, including a 1.5-story dye house. The design of the dye house reflects architectural practices common in buildings used to dye cloth, such as regularly spaced ground-level openings and banks of windows and a monitor space, which improved airflow and allowed for the venting of steam. The period of significance for the Monarch Knitting Company factory stretches from 1912 to 1946, beginning with the initial construction of the factory and ending when the Spencer Lens Company left the premises. This era encompasses all significant architectural developments on the property, as well as marks the period during which both the Monarch Knitting Company and subsequently the Spencer Lens Company were at their most prominent in their respected industries. So this is the Monarch Knitting Company factory. Are there any questions on this one?
Did you look in the wall safe?
I did not.
You didn't look in the wall safe?
Julian was in it. Julian, did you go in the safe?
Did you look in the wall?
Say a word.
Comments from the board? I like the scandalous bathing suit image.
Thank you.
Am I to understand that those are made of wool?
They are wool. I'm pretty sure people think that people in Buffalo swim in wool bathing suits right now, right?
Well, they just did the polar plunge in Lake Erie to raise as a fundraiser.
I love that photo.
But the water temperature was 43 degrees, so how bad could that be?
Perfect.
Do I hear a motion? Wint?
Was it Wint? I thought Kristen had.
Kristen Beam.
We'll give Kristen the second. All in favor?
So it's Wint?
Aye.
Wint and Kristen?
Wint and Kristen.
Okay, got it.
If that's okay.
Oops, forgot to show the interiors. So here we have the buildings at Niagara and 7th Street in Niagara Falls. There are 3 early 20th century mixed-use commercial buildings in the city. The small district reflects a speculative real estate boom in this section of the city that occurred in a relatively brief period of time during this era, specifically between 1908 and 1911. These buildings are locally significant under Criterion C in the area of architecture as examples of early 20th century commercial Italianate mixed-use buildings, and under Criterion A in the area of commerce for their role as a local commercial hub and home to several notable companies which serve the local community. When constructed between 1908 and 1911, these buildings were the only mixed-use buildings within 2 blocks. They remained visual landmarks throughout the 20th century as no other 3-story mixed-use buildings were erected within the immediate surroundings, which were largely residential. The period of significance pertaining to these criteria is between circa 1908 to 1911, the period in which all of these buildings were constructed. In this short time, the block transformed from vacant to a mix of neighborhood commerce and residential apartments. While the rest of Niagara Street never fully developed as a dense commercial thoroughfare, these 3 buildings evidence the zeitgeist of early 20th century Niagara Falls, in which time boundless optimism and continued city development, fueled by advances in hydroelectric power and industrial growth, spurred speculative neighborhood development. In the decades around the turn of the 20th century, new building activity in the city pushed out of the historic downtown as a burgeoning industrial economy spurred unprecedented development and population growth. The area around Niagara and 7th Streets was mostly vacant until after 1900, when, as the city economy shifted towards industrial and manufacturing firms, the population expanded with industrial workers, and real estate investors moved northeast of the existing downtown area, which was generally south of the hydraulic canal. So, I don't know if this has pointer, but here we go. So this is the hydraulic canal. So down here is like where the falls is. So this little box here is where the buildings are located. So let me see here. Whoops. Commissioned by 3 different owners, the buildings at Niagara and 7th Streets created 7 commercial spaces and 21 residential units on a previously vacant block. While Niagara Street did not become the dense commercial street that was initially envisioned by these owners, the nominated buildings reflect the expectation that at the time of their construction that Niagara Street was, quote, bound to become one of the leading business streets in the city, which it did not. So this is another view of the corner building. So this is a private entrance here for the residents. This actually has a really intact, beautiful staircase inside. So as a district, only the exterior of the buildings is evaluated, but I wanted to show a few images from the interior of 612 Niagara Street that reflects the building's development. The west portion of the building at 610 Niagara was constructed in 1908, and the commercial space was utilized by a grocery store. Around 1910, an addition to the building was added. This ghost sign showing the Quaker Oats mascot was apparently painted on the exterior wall of 610 Niagara around 1908 and shortly after encapsulated into the interior of the adjacent commercial space. So we do have 3 approved Part 1s for these buildings. They're a tax credit project. So these are the buildings at Niagara and 7th Street. Are there any questions?
I would just make the comment that there's really elegant treatment of the historic context for the falls in terms of industrialists versus naturalists and energy versus awe. I really like that in there. Also bringing in the Erie Canal and how things change through time. Just really nicely done. Comments, questions? A motion? Wait. I'll second. All in favor? Aye. Opposed or abstained? Unanimous. Thank you. And on to Payne Avenue.
So Payne Avenue High School, located in the city of North Tonawanda, Niagara County, is significant as a good example of a standardized school building from the early 20th century. Designed by Tooker and Marsh, the building is locally significant under Criterion C in the area of architecture and reflects standardization principles in school design of the 1920s. It is also significant under Criterion A in education for its connection to the growing education system in North Tonawanda. As a result of the growth of a successful lumber industry and developments in infrastructure which took place in North Tonawanda at the end of the 19th century, the city attracted a significant swell in settlement that extended into the 20th century. During this time, the North Tonawanda Board of Education undertook several building projects in order to accommodate students in the growing school district, who all required an education based on the compulsory education laws passed by New York State in 1894. By the 1920s, the still booming population of North Tonawanda mandated the construction of a school building capable of providing an education to the unprecedented number of students registered in the city's public school district. Payne Avenue High School opened in 1926, a culmination of the Board of Education's efforts to keep pace with the city's growth, emerged as a monumental civic institution that served as a space for community events in addition to its primary function as a school. The school served as the sole high school in the North Tonawanda School District for 4 decades after its construction. Tooker and Marsh, an architectural firm based in Manhattan with a great degree of influence in the field of school building design, drafted the plans for Payne Avenue High School in accordance with the standards regularly adopted across the state and with the needs and conditions located within the community of North Tonawanda. Since we've talked about a lot of schools, I'm not going to go over standardized schools anymore. So the floor plan accommodates unilateral lighting in every classroom while the main entrance opens to the ground level without the need for steps and the potential risks they pose to children during winter weather. The plan for the school building also exhibits Tooker and Marsh's attention to the expected growth in North Tonawanda's populations. They deliberately designed the I-shaped school building to accommodate multiple future additions. The period of significance begins in 1925-26 when the construction and completion of Payne Avenue High School and ends in 1962 when the building was converted into a middle school. During this time, the building served as the only public high school in North Tonawanda. So this is the Payne Avenue High School. Are there any questions on this?
Questions about Payne? I had to look up the word natatorium. which is a pool house.
It's room for a pool.
Oh, you shouldn't have told us.
Sorry.
It's going to be reused for housing. I'm not exactly sure.
Yeah,
the
it's
exact-
been vacant
It's a
for-
tax credit project.
It's been vacant for 13 years,
It's been vacant for a while, yeah.
but it's still in good shape.
Yeah, actually, this one was in pretty decent shape
Yeah.
compared to the ones I'm usually
agree.
in.
Good context again. No questions? Do I hear a motion to approve this? Jay? Second? Paul? All in favor? Abstain? Object? All right, we're good.
Right, thank you.
Thank you. On to Syracuse and St. Anthony's.
Yeah, this is St. Anthony of Padua, or what I'm calling the other St. Anthony's. If you remember the last meeting, I presented St. Anthony's Convent and College. This time it's a church complex at the corner of Midland Avenue and West Colvin Streets. The complex consists of the 1912 church, 1941 rectory, 1926 convent, and 1926-1936 school. There's also a walkway, also 1941, between the rectory and the church. Okay. As mentioned in the nomination text, the city of Syracuse owns the school and the convent, and the church and the rectory are still owned by the diocese for the still active parish. Syracuse is a certified local government, and we have a letter of support from the City Landmarks Preservation Commission for this nomination. Okay. The primary building is the church, constructed of steel and governor marble, designed by the Syracuse firm of Russell and King, completed in 1912. The exterior photos on the left show the limestone trim and tracery plus the two towers and the corner turrets, which these turrets were kind of a signature feature of much of the work of Archimedes Russell. The interior features a vaulted and coffered ceiling with recessed arches with stained glass windows. And the top right looks towards the chancel, the lower right looks towards the main entrance. The extant rectory, as I said, dates from 1941, and is joined to the church by a connecting passageway seen in the upper left. The lower two images show the dining room on the left and entry hall on the right, both retaining much of the historic fabric, especially in terms of its wood features, floors, doors, moldings, and other details. Immediately east of the church is the convent built for the nuns who taught in the parish school. The building dates from 1926 and is a design of Melvin King, with a later rear addition that added a mansard roof. Vacant for several years, the building still retains much of its historic fabric. Seen on the right is the main entrance door. This is from the interior. And the lower left is a third-floor corridor. Also long vacant is the school, constructed in 1926 and expanded in 1936. Its overall features include Tudor Revival arched entrances, buttresses, and decorative towers with caps that reflect those on the Romanesque Revival-style church. The interior reflects standard school construction, very similar to, Jen just showed you a school. It's the same thing. The standard school construction and retains much of its period detail with the wood trim, blackboards, French doors, wood doors, built-in cabinets, just to name a few. Okay. The entire complex is being nominated under Criterion C for its collection of architecture by well-known Syracuse architects, among them being Archimedes Russell, Melvin King, and Paul Huber Sr. It's also significant for its collection of stained glass by Franz Meyer and Company of Munich, a studio known for specializing in stained glass for Roman Catholic churches. Are there questions and comments?
I have a comment about the quality of the research in this write-up in terms of Catholicism in the region of Syracuse, and the write-up about the stained glass windows. It's just fantastic. Other comments or questions? Also, the chart says that there is a one non-contributing structure. I don't think that's the case. It's 5-0, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I will
Yeah,
double
so there's
check
one,
that.
I just wanted to make
Sorry,
sure.
I'm
There's
sorry.
no non-contributing resources here, correct?
Yeah, sorry about that.
Do I hear a motion? Erica? Erica, seconded by Jay. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed or abstained? Okay.
We proofread these things a million times, and you think that would have shown up.
What?
We proofread these things a million times.
Yeah.
But anyway, okay,
Go
yes.
ahead. No, go ahead, please.
Now on to the Schoharie Village Historic District in Schoharie, which is out of my comfort zone, known as the Finger Lakes, but I want to thank Dan McEnany for handing this off to me because I'm learning more history about New York State in an area that I'm unfamiliar with, and this is a fascinating history.
Well, this came from Emily's territory, so
Yes.
I want to thank both Dan for
Mhm.
picking up on it and Virginia for picking up on, Dan's picking up
Absolutely.
on it. And it's a Preserve New York NISCA project that we had to pick up on when Emily left, one of several, so kudos to Dan and Virginia for shouldering this one.
Yeah, this is a big one.
And because of the flooding out there after Hurricane Irene,
Irene.
when the commissioner and Andy Beers and I were out there after the flood and the damage that was done, we're so pleased to see this go forward at last. Really happy about this nomination.
The Schoharie Village Historic District encompasses most of the village, with some portions on the east side omitted due to being developed after the period of significance or lacking the necessary integrity with the nominated district. The nomination documents 352 contributing resources, not counting 18 previously listed properties, all reflecting the long period of history that goes from 1743 to 1968. The district is being nominated under Criterion A in the areas of settlement and community development. The village formed from 3 of 7 18th century villages settled by Palatine German immigrants, the 3 being Foxtown, Smithtown, and Fountaintown. I didn't want to belabor you with the German words, so I'm giving you the English. Besides, it's in English on this map anyway. Okay. After the American Revolution, residents returned to the area to rebuild the community that was all but destroyed by the British and their allies, which is a fascinating history and all outlined in the nomination text. In 1795, Schoharie County was created with the village as the county seat, making it a government center, an important status it retains at present. On the left is the 3rd County Courthouse, built in 1870 on the site of 2 previous courthouses. On the far right, let's see if I can, this building here, is the 1914 County Clerk's Building. These buildings underscore the importance of being a county seat and the community's need to rebuild a courthouse after previous losses to fire. The district is also being nominated under Criterion A in the area of transportation for Schoharie's Main Street, which is now part of SR 20, or New York 20, which parallels the Schoharie Creek. Main Street began with the early Palatine settlers, connecting all of the Palatine villages and later becoming a major coach and wagon route. The Parrot House, it's this, seen in the lower left, was built in 1870 to replace an earlier hotel that burned to supply a need for accommodating travelers arriving by coach and later the railroad. The Historic District is also being nominated under Criterion C for its vast array of commercial, public, and residential architecture, again all illustrating a long period of development from Federal and Greek Revival era buildings to later Queen Anne and Colonial Revival residences, like these examples on Main Street. Additional residential development occurred in the village west of Main Street beginning in the mid-19th century with newly opened or renamed streets. Fair Street was originally known as River Street, but was given its new name for being the location of the fairgrounds, which all but disappeared to additional residential development by the early to mid-20th century. Originally named New Street, Grand Street opened in the late 1860s with sizable lots, allowing for larger and more stylish residences, including a mid-19th century brick octagon house. right here. Okay. Despite fires on Main Street and recent serious floods, the village's historic stock has proven remarkably resilient with limited losses. Last but not least, the district is being nominated in the area of agriculture, and that would be under Criterion A. Large farm fields surround the residential development on both sides of the village, representing the village's continuous agricultural heritage. A large nursery operation that began a century ago is still in business on both sides of Bridge Street. The nomination is sponsored by the Village of Schoharie and funded in part by a grant from the Preservation League of New York State and the New York State Council on the Arts. Any questions or comments about this nomination?
I would think that flooding might have been historically a problem there. Is it,
From reading the consultant's historic record on it, it seems fire was more of a problem than flooding.
It's so far from the creek when you see it. I mean, there's this enormous, enormous floodplain. I remember going out there when they had the Labor for Your Neighbor program. We were all stuck on the bus trying to get through the village to the drop-off point and thinking, like, wow, what a massive area that
It is a tributary of the Monarch River too, so it just comes right down.
But I remember after the flood, Mark Peckham called the mayor and personally offered to write the nomination himself so that they could get tax credits, and he was turned down. So this is great.
One of those mayors.
But, this is great. This is great that this is all happening.
The current mayor
really
is very
happy.
supportive of this nomination. I met him.
I appreciate the explanation of how integrity was determined in this write-up. That was excellent. There are 64 primary non-contributing buildings and no map of the density. Is there any areas in this district where their non-contributing materials cluster?
Yeah, that will be provided, Doug, with the final nomination. We just haven't.
I'd really like to see it.
Just didn't send it to you. We're required to do that.
Yeah, this is one of my pet
One
questions.
of the reasons why there's some of these areas because of the size of the historic district, and we wanted definitely to include. I want to make sure I do this the right way here. There is a significant property right down here on the corner, and this area here along New York 20, Main Street. There's a lot of post-1968 construction, including a very large senior citizen apartment complex. Okay, they've made it look kind of colonial revival, but it was built like 2014. So that's why we've got some large pockets here. One of these agricultural fields is owned by the same people that own the agricultural field here, and we all know about farming and how, let's just say it's not like being a lawyer, okay? You need to find ways of making your farm survive. So the family that owns area here has taken a small part of their agricultural field and they've been selling it for residential development. Okay? So that's why you get that. Okay.
While continuing to reflect the historic boundary of the three original settlements. So it's kind of a trade-off there.
Do I hear a motion? Wint? Kristen, will second. All in favor? Aye.
Thank you.
Opposed or abstained? None.
Jay, thank you to the League for finally getting this village where it needed to be quite some time ago. It's a very special piece of the Schoharie Valley, and your funding to make that happen is most appreciated.
And we'll thank the New York State Council on the Arts.
It's a partnership. I'll never forget driving through there after the flood and seeing the insides of people's houses piled on the street. I was on the bus with the commissioner and Andy and people from DEC, and it just, it was so sad. And it's great that. And the original proposal after the flood was to demolish like the side of Main Street that was on the floodplain.
Did Middleburg suffer the same way and has the same?
I don't know it as well.
I would say this.
But I think we've done a district there.
I think we do.
I did it once.
Right. Yeah.
back to Queens. The Richmond Hill Historic District, located in eastern Queens, encompasses a small early portion of the current residential neighborhood of Richmond Hill. Significant under Criterion A in the area of planning and development and Criterion C in the area of architecture, the district comprises the most intact portion of the original Richmond Hill subdivision, as mapped in 1868 by business partners Alban Platt Mann and Edward Richmond. Richmond Hill is a quintessential 19th century railroad suburb. In response to the completion of the South Side Railroad to the area, the partners acquired portions of several farms and then worked quickly to lay out streets and sell lots. With the aim of giving the neighborhood a park-like appearance, Mann and Richmond planted thousands of shade trees. Many remain and are a significant feature of the district and made it a pain to photograph. The construction of homes was slowed by economic conditions during the 1870s. And the estate built a few model homes, including this one, but primarily managed the neighborhood's development through covenants and deed restrictions. The majority of the large, architecturally distinguished homes that define the character of the neighborhood were built between 1890 and 1915, during which Richmond Hill was incorporated as a village and then quickly annexed into Greater New York. During this period, the railroad suburb primarily attracted middle and upper class commuters working within Brooklyn and Manhattan. The district was developed almost exclusively with single-family, freestanding frame homes. That's an exceptional one there. While the estate did not have a minimum cost required for buildings constructed within the neighborhood, its large lots were well suited for the sprawling Queen Anne and shingle styles that remained popular in the neighborhood's early decades. In addition, classically inspired Renaissance Revival and Colonial Revival houses and examples of Dutch Colonial, Tudor Revival, and Craftsman architecture are predominant in the neighborhood. Many were speculatively designed and constructed by architect-builders and reflect the skills of local architects. Following the arrival of the subway in 1917 and the advent of the Great Depression in 1930, most of the remaining open lots were developed with smaller houses, which were then in vogue, and appealed to the new buyers relying on mass transit and private automobiles. Unlike surrounding neighborhoods, many of which were quickly developed, built out during economic booms, and have a consistent architectural character as a result, one of the things that's special about this little area of the neighborhood is that it encompasses the range of architectural styles over 6 decades. The built landscape of the urban residential neighborhood remains largely intact to the mature appearance it achieved in 1930 and reflects Richmond Hill's early planning and development, its height as a railroad suburb, and its final early 20th century development. The draft for this nomination was prepared by Chris Brzee. We have letters of support from Historic Districts Council, the Richmond Hill Historical Society, New York City Parks, and one of the property owners. The sponsors have excellent support for this. They've obtained 2,000 signatures from community members, and the public meeting that I attended was well attended and generally pretty positive.
You have a comment from Landmarks? We
have a comment from Landmarks. They have questions about some of the integrity in the district, but they are fine with us going forward and nominating it.
And this nomination has a wonderful map in it that you did not show of the contributing and non-contributing resources.
Yes.
Which I would like to see in every
Chris is an excellent
map maker.
We are required to do that, Doug, to send a contributing and non-contributing, but often that is made by Mike Schifferle, and Mike has got a heavy workload and sometimes he doesn't finish it until after you see the form, so we'll try to get that to you in advance. In the future.
It's just a really great example of what I'm looking for.
Yeah, well, that is what we send to Parks.
It's really helpful, the maps. I'll send that.
It's important.
Okay. I endeavor to have those in with the draft.
Yeah,
So in some cases it doesn't happen.
Okay.
I like the fact that you explained how the term Jamaica came about in this form, which is great. I didn't know that it was a derivation of a Native American term. Also the explanation of railroad suburb and this subdivision as being cast in the context of the people who made the subdivision versus the builders that built the buildings themselves. That was really elegant and nicely done. Other comments?
Before a vote, Jen, would you articulate the omission of the railroad right-of-way from the nomination? I think it's an interesting technical issue.
Okay.
Oh, that's right.
So what you see in this picture is a very large viaduct that runs through the district. So it starts in sort of the northern end of the district and extends all the way through to the other side of the community. So only about a third of the viaduct is included within the historic district. According to National Register regulations, you cannot list a portion of a resource. So we reached out to the National Park Service for their guidance on how they would like us to handle this. Including the entire resource would have made for a very gerrymandered district and didn't seem quite appropriate, but so we were in a quandary. And their response in this case, which was unusual, was to treat it like a street. And so while it is in the district, it is not listed as a resource within the historic district. And that was stated very clearly in the nomination because this is an unusual situation.
And one that happens again.
In fact, our reviewer disagreed with it, but the other reviewers, the majority of the reviewers down there just told us not to do it.
Yeah, and she was like, well, this is a weird situation.
As if it weren't there.
She didn't particularly like this solution, but she didn't have a better solution to offer.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Do I hear a motion?
I'll move.
Jay? I'll second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Opposed or abstained? No, looks good. And now to the boundary correction for St. Johnsville Historic
No, we moved that
Okay.
to, sorry, I sent you a new.
Okay, so
I sent you a new one. Yes. Yeah. That's going to be.
Colonel Peter B. Vrooman.
And Joe and Berna, welcome. Great to have you.
Honored to be here.
My only regret is this didn't come right after the Schoharie Village Historic Districts. My understanding is really this past the Roman House was traditionally the gateway into the village over the bridge and past the stone fort. I think my slate of nominations wins the Diversity Award for the State Review Board meeting. Okay, Colonel B. Vroman House, located in the town of Schoharie, Schoharie County, at a location is located at a location traditionally known as Roman Corners. Constructed in the early 1790s, the Vroman House is an architecturally significant example of traditional New World Dutch domestic architecture. It is a story-and-a-half timber frame building erected above a rectangular plan and has a later columned portico corresponding with the principal elevation and east-facing facade. Inside, the Roman house retains ample evidence of its later 18th century origins, including finished ceiling beams and other woodwork, in addition to features added subsequently during the historic period. I first visited the house in the company of Emily Gould, since Schoharie was Emily's territory, and I later visited with my friend Walter Wheeler, who I consider one of our preeminent experts on New World Dutch timber frame architecture. We spent a lot of time looking at the house. We cooked up a theory about how we thought it had evolved. And then Berna and Joe, much to their credit, decided to do dendrochronology on the house, and it blew up everything we thought about it. So the wonders of science, and I do want to stress that dendrochronology, tree ring dating, is really a very useful tool in the dating of these buildings. The dwelling was erected for Colonel Peter B. Vroman, a figure of considerable prominence in regional affairs during his lifetime. He served as the secretary of the Schoharie District Committee of Safety, as a colonel of the 15th Regiment of Albany County Militia, as a representative of the several sessions of the New York State Legislature, and as an elected delegate to the New York Constitution Ratification Convention. As built in the early 1790s, Vroman's house forms an important regional representation of New World Dutch domestic architecture, a building tradition inclusive of that region's Palatine German population. And it received subsequent modifications during the course of the 19th century and again in the early 20th century, at which time colonial revival-style features were introduced. Given the destruction of Schoharie during the American Revolution in 1780, at which time the vast majority of its housing stock was destroyed, it remains an important artifact from the early period of rebuilding which occurred in the community subsequently. The house is being nominated for its direct association with Roman, its most noted occupant in the area of politics and government, and additionally in the area of architecture. One of the baffling things as we started to try to figure out this house is why Peter Vroman put his initials in the date of 1780 in the foundation wall. We had suspected that perhaps the house incorporated part of an earlier house on site that had been destroyed, but really the dendrochronology pretty much pointed to a pretty consistent date of 1792 for the house's construction. So again, the wonders of science. Bernie and Joe, I'm glad I got to pick up this project from Emily. I'm wondering if there's anything you guys might want to come up and... Nothing? Yeah, come on.
I would just comment that I am a retired rocket scientist. My wife, Dean at the College of William and Mary, are so honored to be in this community and to see the history of this house and its importance to the community. The work that we have seen done on the house in its construction, as explained to us by the experts who know the history and know how the house was built, is such an amazing feature for us. We love the house, love the community. We're honored to be here and thoroughly enjoy taking care of the house and seeing it move forward into the next generations and hopefully millennia. Thank you.
I also, come on up, and I also want to know, were it not for your research, we wouldn't be here.
Thank you. I just wanted to mention that we have one very interesting non-contributing building that we own, the Mildred Froman Easter Egg Museum, which is on the property. And Mildred Vroman was a fifth great-granddaughter of Colonel Vroman, which meant that the house was in the family, went out of the family, and then came back. And we've adopted the family. But the Easter Egg Museum, Mildred Vroman spent 60 years of her life painting these Easter eggs and putting them into scenes, like the Last Supper and the First Thanksgiving and the Old Stone Fort. And one of the reasons we were really delighted that the nomination came up now is because this spring we're going to open the Easter Egg Museum to the public. And we think that being able to say that it is a treasure for the entire community will add to the opening of the Easter Egg Museum. So I hope that all of you will come in April to see these wonderful eggs too. Thank you.
And I regret we actually had slides of the Easter Egg Museum because it's so singular and we were afraid we were pressed for time. But yes, it must be seen to be believed. That's what I will say.
Bill, can you say a word about the archaeology that's occurred on this property?
Yeah, so we originally, there has been some archaeological excavations done here. It has been deemed significant in that context by the State Museum. We originally had some of that in the nomination, but we didn't feel as though it was properly fleshed out. In the interest of moving this forward in this context, we wanted to say that that does exist, but we'd like to see perhaps a subsequent project focus on that.
Do you know what level the archaeology was taken to in terms of phase 1 through 3, and if a National Register eligibility?
They definitely issued a determination that it was eligible based upon the initial excavation work, so there was some field work done. Yes.
It's still not enough to put D in there.
Well, not enough to explain the methodology and the
and provide research
questions.
The research questions.
That was the main. Yeah, I initially had it in, and we felt as though it was wanting, so it was best to just not address it in a half-measure fashion.
We didn't have the research questions that would satisfy NPS, but we can we don't even have to come back to the board. We could simply write that up and send it down as an added area of significance at a later date.
Sure.
Yes, we do want to write, and it gives a depth of history, obviously, to the site.
Yeah, there's pre-contact material as well.
Exactly.
I mean, the period of significance could be thousands of years.
Yeah, so it's a whole different, like it's a different nomination within the same property.
Understood. Thank you for that information.
Thank you.
Other questions or comments? Motion?
I appreciate that you did the dinner promotion. Thank you for, because that's important.
Yeah.
It was fun.
Did you work with Cornell to do that? How did you go about?
Went to Columbia University.
Columbia University. Excellent, excellent. Do I hear a motion? Kristen, seconded by Wayne. All in favor? Aye. Opposed or abstained? Motion carries.
Please know that our state rehabilitation tax credit program is now available to you. And we'd be happy to work with you.
Not for the Easter eggs.
All right, so the last time you'll be seeing me today.
Oh,
here's a couple more pictures. I couldn't enjoy that picture here for a moment. Any comments, Bill? So down to Brooklyn. The German Evangelical Lutheran St. John's Church is locally significant under criterion C as an excellent example of high Victorian Gothic design in Brooklyn. It is additionally significant under criterion A in the area of ethnic history for both the original congregation of German origin and descent that established the church in Williamsburg and its mid-20th century transformation into a predominantly African American and Hispanic congregation involved in the civil rights and progressive movements. The congregation was first established in the mid-19th century in the predominantly German community of Williamsburg. After the population of German immigrants and the need for German religious institutions and German language services grew, the congregation constructed this church, which could hold 1,000 worshipers in 1883. Designed by architect Theobald Engelhardt, a Brooklyn-born descendant of German immigrants who would become prominent for his work within the German community, the High Victorian Gothic church and rectory incorporate English-inspired elements with German Gothic roots. St. John's is Engelhardt's first known church design. The church and rectory feature the varied textures, polychromatic masonry, and Gothic arches typical of the High Victorian Gothic, as well as the brick construction typical of German institutions. The church's central tower and open hall church plan, allowing for tall stained glass windows, are also hallmarks of the German Gothic style. I'm just going to walk into the vestibule here and into the sanctuary itself. This was one of the most important Lutheran churches in the Eastern District of Brooklyn, and the church offered services in German into the 20th century, maintained a large German parochial school, and founded a mission church in Glendale, Queens, as its membership began moving east. And we have a few more detail shots of the sanctuary. These pieces here are early, if not original, and very lovely. Architects Helmley, Huberty, and Hudswell designed the congregation's new parochial school in 1904 in a simple, compatible style. Previously, they'd been using their former church building as a school building, but they brought it all together onto one property in 1904. After the Glendale mission split from St. John's, the leaders of the Williamsburg congregation reached out to the surrounding community, which reflected new waves of immigration and settlement into the area. During the second half of the 20th century, St. John's was revitalized as a primarily African American and Hispanic congregation, but it did still remain this Lutheran leadership. And under the leadership of Reverend Richard Newhouse, who is right here in the corner, who would become a prominent national religious leader, the congregation became known for its involvement in civil rights, anti-war, and other progressive movements. And there's a lot more to his story than is really gotten at the nomination. Interesting little side note where he becomes more of this important national figure and the congregation sort of has to let him go to go off and do bigger and better things. Beginning with its origins as an institution serving immigrant Germans through its later history of adapting to serve its neighborhood, the German Evangelical Lutheran St. John's Church continues to play an important role in integrating diverse communities into city life. This is a Columbia student draft, which was brought to them, I believe, by Sacred Sites, and we do have a letter of support from the New York City Landmarks Preservation Commission.
Excellent. Questions from the board? Motion? Wayne, and then Wint is a second. All in favor? Aye. Abstain or oppose? Good.
Thank you.
Thank you. To Troy?
To Dresden.
Oh, right, sorry.
Okay, I have two proposals to round out my slate of 6 here, and we will start with Dresden School Number 2, located in the town of Dresden in the Clemens vicinity of Washington County. District School Number 2 is a small one-room rural educational building erected in a rugged and remote location, and I will stress that. Nearly impossible to find, but we found it. It is a single-story schoolhouse of wood-frame construction with a gable front roof and limited architectural elaboration. Both the exterior and interior survive with the bulk of their character-defining features intact, save for the loss of a small woodshed or privy addition that once spanned the facade, and some areas where the plaster ceiling has failed inside. Although its construction is not chronicled in the historical record, the building's physical traits, along with documentary and anecdotal information, sustain the circa 1880 date of construction. The building presently continues to portray its historic use as a rural schoolhouse in spite of serving as a sometimes seasonal residence. Few alterations have been made to accommodate that use, and it retains its single-room interior volume and modest wood and plaster finishes. It's basically used as a hiking outpost for a gentleman who enjoys hiking those mountains, who lives otherwise in Canton. Occupying a remote location in the rugged landscape that characterizes Dresden's location between Lake George and Lake Champlain, the building continued to function as an educational building into the 1940s, by which time the various district systems in Washington's towns were consolidated. The building's history is somewhat unclear, to some extent the result of its remote location in a sparsely populated town, and also given the destruction of the town's records by fire in the 1870s. It is a characteristic example of the one-room school type, built on straightforward terms and lacking any significant pretense to architectural style. The school is being nominated in association with Criterion A in the area of education and the Criterion C in the area of architecture. See, it's really all there. It had been sort of open to the elements and semi-vandalized when the present owner found it. But a fair degree of integrity, and really a very interesting building, and with somewhat murky history for a school building. And that is the Dresden District School Number 2.
Yeah, it's neat. Questions? Comments from?
Question.
Yes, sir.
It must be on a public road, or it must have originally been on a public road.
Yeah,
Maybe
it's a road that's actually closed, and he has a sign as you go. They say you cannot keep going and go anywhere here. Turn around now. So something has happened to the road system. He has people following GPS who wind up in front of it all the time. Turn around and go back to Route 22, basically.
Bill, what is the motivation for this listing on behalf of
I think pride, largely. He really wanted to honor the building. It really wasn't motivated by incentives. It had been in-house for a while, so just closing out some old business.
Right.
Would someone like to move? Wint, seconded by Erica. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed or abstain? Great, thanks, Bill.
Not done with me yet.
Okay, now Troy.
Okay, now Troy.
Now Troy.
Really interesting building, the Rentschler Society of Engineers House, located at RPI in the city of Troy, Rentschler County. Built in the mid-1920s to the designs of Bertram Goodhue, among the foremost American architects of his time. The building's asymmetrical massing of simple geometric elements, coupled with the simplification or omission of academic detail, which was typical of Goodhue during the later years of his practice, characterizes the overall design. It was conceived and built to provide living, sleeping, and dining accommodations conducive to academic pursuits for the members of RSE. Goodhue designed the building to accommodate 32 members and realized that, as all individuals are not identical, the separation of the daily functions of studying, sleeping, dressing, and dining would benefit both the members individually and the society as a whole. Completed in 1924, it has changed little in the ensuing years, as the basic interior spatial concept implemented by Goodhue has ably served the needs of the membership. I will note there was a factual error in this nomination in that Goodhue had no association with RPI or RSE. We've asked RSE to confirm. We believe he was made an honorary member of RSE following his execution of this design for them. It remains an important example of the work of Goodhue and a representative example of 1920s era neoclassical style architecture. Yep, I'm going the wrong way. And one thing you see in really both the massing of the building and the fenestration is a building that really was built in large measure from the inside out. And there were some things that were very specific to the engineering students, such as this open drafting room. And Goodhue's, basically his intent was that if you're going to go and work as a draftsman or a professional engineer, subsequent to your education, you should learn how to work basically in a noisy environment, and thus this open sort of concept for that part of the building. As noted at the time of its completion, in all of these ways, the Rentschler Society of Engineers plans, with its increased facilities, to contribute what strength it can to the splendid work of RPI in engineering and education. I want to put a little shout out to a person who is no longer with us, and that is Lombard Pazzi, who was an alum of RSE and later on went on to gain considerable note as a preservation architect in Rhode Island. He had actually originally submitted to this application to us some time ago before the building was 50 years old, and it was rejected. And then somehow, in a subsequent attempt, we said, well, we don't think it's, this was long ago, I will note. We said we didn't feel it was eligible. Now, looking at this as a work of Goodhue, and a building which is really has so many important associations with RSE and a design, we were sort of baffled how this came to pass. But we are now honoring Mr. Pazzi's work. Most of the narrative represented his work. I tried as much as possible to leave his work intact within the nomination with some expansion. And that is the RSE house.
Questions?
One question,
yes.
Because I don't think it's addressed, and it may not be significant. Does this function sort of as a single chapter fraternity?
I think that's...
How are the residents elect? Are they elected by
yeah, I think it's a fraternal
class?
Organization, basically, but you gain membership to, and then, can reside in the building.
As opposed to a frat house?
Yes, I wouldn't quite call it a frat house.
Okay.
Yes.
I think that's an important distinction.
Yeah,
sure we did.
I'll move. Do we have a second? Paul Stewart, seconds. All in favor?
Aye.
You received the material on this. It's basically a technical correction. So you got all sorts of pictures. And in March, when we presented it to you, it made sense to draw the boundary historically along the railroad tracks. And that would...
She's magic.
Well, let's just go back for a minute. All we're asking you to do, that would go through the bridge. We can't do that. All we want to do is change the boundary to exclude the approach.
You might be too close to it.
Maybe I am. All we want to do is exclude the bridge and its approach to it and the vacant property owned by the village. The village is fine with this. And since we're decreasing the boundary, we need your concurrence.
And this is the same issue with the other form where you can't have part of a feature.
Exactly. In this case, it's easy because it's a vacant parcel, and we're able to entirely exclude the approach to the bridge. This nomination is ready to put in the mail. When Mike actually mapped it, that's when we discovered it.
Motion? Wayne, seconded by Kristen. All in favor?
Aye. Thank you.
Yeah.
We've already getting tax credit applications for that one. Okay, so last, and this building was surveyed in 1981, and the application came in 1998. So if you can indulge 2 more minutes while I present it. This is the Hazard Wilcox Jr. Farm in the town of Smyrna, Shenango County. It's one of 5 farms built along a north-south stretch of County Route 14 between the villages of Smyrna and Earlville by the Wilcox family. They were New Englanders who arrived from Rhode Island at the turn of the 19th century. These farms paralleled the Shenango River, then the Shenango Canal, and later the O&W Railroad, which gave these farmers access to transportation and trade routes. This particular parcel was sold to a grandson of the first Wilcox settler in 1836 and was developed shortly thereafter. The property includes an outstanding example of a Greek Revival-style upright and wing farmhouse, which is a typical farmhouse type in this region, and the enframement here is paired against a plate from Asher Benjamin's The Practical House Carpenter, published in 1830. And on the interior, the main block of the original portion of the farmhouse is almost completely intact and retains a combination of Federal and Greek Revival style trim, and much of it, including, this is actually the first floor parlor. They use it as a bedroom now, and that is the double doors from the first floor parlor into the back room. But much of it, including window frames with corner blocks and door enframelings, is identical or similar to the plates found in Benjamin's book. The farm also includes a mid-century hop house, and there you can see the kiln and the up to the drying room there, the slatted roof frame there. It includes a mid-century hop house and an early 20th century dairy barn that was an addition to the early 19th century barn, which then burned. The buildings are located at the east end of the property, and the land rises gradually to the west, where it ends in woods. In between are fields in pasture, divided into 4 distinct zones separated by fields, trees, and hedgerows, and that's most likely an historical pattern of land use. The original 80-acre parcel remained in the Hazard Wilcox family for a century. After that, it was sold in the 20s, and then a later owner in the 60s subdivided the portion across the road and consolidated it with other land in the 60s. So there are 4 other Wilcox farms. I wish I had better slides to show you, but you can kind of get the impression here. There are 4 other Wilcox farms along County Route 14. One of the other farmhouses is nearly identical to this one. It just has a later window alteration in the wing portion. The others are also neoclassical in style. There's also a family cemetery across the road where all the Wilcoxes are buried, and we would really like to see a Wilcox Rural Historic District here. However, we feel these people have waited long enough, and this is an individually eligible farm. It's a very striking agricultural landscape. So the Hazard Wilcox Jr. Farm is significant under criterion A for its long association with settlement and agricultural development of the town of Smyrna, and under criterion C for its distinctive collection of 19th and 20th century farm buildings and landscape. And I want to thank Cindy Falk and the Cooperstown graduate students who took this on as a volunteer project. I've been working with them for over a year on just getting the documentation for this. It was really Cindy who kind of went to the library and put together everything I needed to pull this together at the very last minute. And that is the Hazard Wilcox Jr. Farm in the town of Smyrna.
Thank you, Kath. Questions?
Mr. Chairman, why don't we all contribute some audio to this wonderful photograph?
Thank you, Wint. I don't know what I would have done without that little.
I'm going to take that, Moo, as a motion from Wint.
A motion.
Yes.
A motion?
A motion.
Okay.
Would somebody second? Kristen Barron second. All in favor, please move. All right, that concludes the nominations. I believe the board has some business. Could I just have your attention real quick? We got to eat lunch, and we have some board business to do, so eat your lunch at this table so we can talk. And we should do that quickly, so if people want to do the tour at 1:15, you can get on that.
Well done, management.
Oh, thank you. All right, so just for our working lunch here are first of all, the calendar, and secondly, the issue of a quorum. Correct?
And we will need to revote on Rockefeller.
And we're also going to do a revote for one of the nominations for an issue that's come up for me personally a couple times, and is probably going to be something we want to be more aware of, and that's conflict of interest.
Appearance of.
Or the appearance of conflict of interest.
So on that matter specifically, Chris and Heron, to your credit, thank you for approaching me. There's a concern that Lucy, in voting in support of a nomination that affects, her family's history, her family's property, should have recused herself in that situation to avoid even just the appearance of a conflict of interest. We did speak briefly with agency counsel Kathleen Martens, and she has asked us to take to re-vote on the nomination, which I think we can accomplish quickly and efficiently, but that would be best for our procedure to do so.
And so, to that end, I'm asking for a motion to accept the Rockefeller nomination.
I can now move up to...
you can now move up to...
primary mover.
Prime mover.
I can second.
Jay seconds.
Jay second.
And all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
And I just want to mention,
Abstentions?
oops.
Wait a second.
I just want to mention that on the, we consulted with agency counsel just out of an overabundance of caution and to be sure that, with all due respect to the family, that this nomination was unquestionable, and that counsel's office did advise us that there would be no conflict in this, but even to avoid the appearance of any conflict, that she advised that we do take this revote.
Now, the Schoharie Historic District.
Can I just?
Please.
It would be great if there is any formal information on what constitutes conflict of interest. I know I brought it up because in our agency, every staff member, every panelist has to fill out a conflict of interest, and then we always bring up whether there's an appearance where it's not there, and
Absolutely.
so we always take a really cautious approach.
Yes.
I brought it up in the past, like last time, I didn't know if I should be voting on something that I had a personal connection to, even though I wasn't directly impacted by the result of it. So I don't know if there is a policy or a procedure for parks. I know our agency has it. If there is, it'd be great to see.
Yeah, we'll figure that out and circulate that after this meeting. We do the same thing for the New York Archaeological Council. All the board members fill out a conflict of interest policy and state where their conflicts might reside. Now, something happened with the Schoharie Historic District where we talked about people in the room being involved in funding and things like that. Does that rise to the level of conflict of interest as well?
No.
Okay. Jay said no.
Well, and our funding is not funding the nomination itself. It's
you're
New York.
But if you fund it as an organization, you're not personally benefiting.
We're not personally benefiting from it, yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
cool.
Yeah, one of the questions that I had, and I don't know, this may not qualify either, but say we vote for a historic district, which may ultimately make that district eligible for rehabilitation tax credits. If you or a family member live in that historic district, would that be an appearance of a conflict of interest?
I believe so.
In which case, we may need to revote St. Johnsville.
And now the question I have is, okay, now at what point does this conflict of interest issue cause us to have quorum problems?
Well, in all honesty, that happens at my agency.
Yeah,
I'm not encouraging quorum problems, but
we
had
have to
to
be realistic.
postpone decisions because of quorum issues.
And that brings me to introduce what Jay asked me to report on last time was how a quorum is calculated. And I don't have the exact citation here, but I did send it out to you. I checked it out with Kathleen Martens, and according to, I think it's the public meetings law or the public officers law or something, it has to be a quorum of the entire board. And not only does it have to be a quorum of the entire board to meet, it has to be a quorum of the entire board to pass something. So that means we have to have 7 votes in favor to pass an item. So say we only have 7 of you here, and someone has to recuse him or herself.
A recusal means we cannot.
That we could not move forward if we only had 7 of you here. Or if someone wants to vote
I don't even
against
think you
something.
can hold the meeting if there's no quorum.
Well, we wouldn't hold the meeting if there is no quorum, but say you're sitting here and you suddenly realize, oh, wait, I own a property in that district, I can't vote. Or say the Rockefeller one, say we only had 7 here and we suddenly realized Lucy couldn't vote. We wouldn't be able to vote with only 6 people. Or a property could be voted against. Say one of you decided you were not in favor of it. If there were 10 of you, it would be 9-1, it would still pass. But if there were only 7 of you, it would be 6-1 and it would go down. And that, we don't want to put any pressure on you to vote for something that you wouldn't be in favor of.
That's right.
But, you know, if there were all 10 of you here, there would be no problem. But if there were only 7 of you here, and it would be 6-1.
Vote your conscience.
It would vote your conscience, but it would be.
Jay, do you want to recuse yourself from a vote that we took today?
What's that going to mean for the discussion Kat just had? Because I just see Wayne walked out.
We have 7 here.
Then I want to recuse myself from the St. Johnsville nomination.
Well, did Wayne leave?
Yes.
Forever? Well, he'll be back in a second.
What is meant by the whole board? Is it the whole board is authorized or the whole board is appointed?
Authorized.
As authorized, which is our big number, which we don't have, and that's a
We don't
problem.
have it, that's it.
That was my question.
So the board number is 12, the quorum is 7.
13, I think it was 13.
13 and 7.
So 7 is the quorum that we must have to meet and to pass an item.
To meet and to pass, that's
Yeah, well,
right.
not to cause a difficulty, but my parents live in St. Johnsville.
Well,
And they're in the district now.
Where isn't there a Di Lorenzo?
There's not that many of our
Who
Di
knew?
Lorenzos. It's just
I
not
always
really.
wondered where the Di Lorenzos were from.
It's just
Now
them.
we know. But that means that, you know, not having our full board is gonna distress.
something we have
it's
to
just
be
something
very
we
much
have to-
aware of.
Something you have to be aware of every meeting.
Kath, can you take notes to reflect Jay's recusal?
Yes.
Jay recused him.
And that's for 2 of them today, Jay?
Just St. Johnsville.
Just St. Johnsville.
The historic district boundary extension.
Now, Lucy does not know she recused herself for St.
She does not.
Johnsville.
She does
Here
not.
comes Wayne, back here.
So let me just revert to the Lucy question. Is her own house and her land within the
No,
park?
no.
It's not,
No.
so that's been checked out. Because I know there's some private holdings.
So are we gonna read, do you wanna make another motion?
Wayne, we talked about quorums and recusal, and the need to be more aware of both.
Because I didn't make a motion or anything. You can just.
So
mark me
Jay
as
is
a-
going to recuse
just
himself
recuse-
from the St.
mark me as a
Johnsville vote,
recusal on that
because
vote.
he has a family residence
But
in
we
the
still,
in the district.
I see.
we don't have to revote it though, we just have to recuse
No,
it.
we just have to make a notation that he
Fair.
recuses.
And for Rockefeller,
For Rockefeller, we had a revote
we revoted,
with Lucy not here.
and does Lucy
that's-
have to then tell us she recused herself? How does that
No,
work?
this vote supersedes that one.
But I mean, we will put down that she recused herself.
No.
No.
We will go with the second vote.
Okay. Oh, I see, all right.
That'll end up in the meeting minutes.
I mean,
so
how will well, I'll talk to you about that later, how to actually note that in the meeting. We revoted after legal counsel or something.
All right, are we good with those? On to the
All
issue
right.
of the calendar?
Okay, so the calendar, most of you were, those of you who responded were okay with the dates. I've had one correction. Jay pointed out that March 14th is the last day of the trip when people go to Washington to discuss funding with their
Preservation Action Lobby.
yeah, preservation action. And so we're asking now that we have that meeting on the Friday instead of the 14th, instead of March 14th, which is a Thursday. If you could possibly come on the Ides of March, which is really an auspicious day to have a board meeting.
Meeting
That
on
would be
Friday the 15th, you're saying?
Friday, March 15th.
How horrible is that for people? I see some
We
cringing.
did it last year.
I'm cringing too.
I know it's not good,
And
but
let me just add, it wasn't because I'm not going to be here. I'm probably not going to go to DC. I just wanted to point
But-
out if you were going or
But
Michael was going,
and-
Wayne is going.
Michael and Daniel and, oh, you're
Wayne's-
going?
Wayne's gonna be there.
Wayne's going. So that makes it a bad day.
It's okay for me.
Well, again, because of this rule of 7, we'll call it, and the potential for more recusals than we're used to, we'd like to get as many people here as possible.
Kristen, how's the 15th for you?
I was just looking at, I mean, you all are.
It's a long time in the future. I
Yeah, it was the Friday I made a face to. so
Yeah, no, I-
travel.
Not great.
But, I mean, I could, at this point, it looks like I could do it, and you're accommodating my
We're
issues
accommodating
in
you
June.
not being
so
able to
I
do
need
it on the week
be-
before.
She's
right?
being accommodated in June? Well, you gotta be here.
I haven't. Never do those dates in June that are always those original dates.
That's right.
So in that respect, if everyone else can do it, I'll make it happen.
And we talked
Oh,
about
but
no
Jen has-
possibility of remote participation in the meetings. So if she was on the phone and had the PowerPoint in front of her and we called on her individually, that would not qualify?
Can we Skype a meeting?
We, Kathleen
No.
wasn't sure about
No,
that.
I don't think
It's
so.
possible, but the open meetings law seemed to prohibit it. Kathleen wasn't as sure about that as we all have been. We don't have Wi-Fi at Peebles, so I don't know whether we could do it at all.
I will say that our council has been doing it. I'm not sure if I would have thought we followed the same rules. Personally, I don't find it as effective. It's
not.
better if everyone's
It's not
in the
as
room.
effective.
But certainly if there's so I don't know how our agency
We were
does it
always
in
told
other
in the
towns.
past that the open meetings law prohibited it.
Michael, is there a specific?
No, that's what I remember.
Yeah, that's what we were always told in the past. However, Kathleen seemed to think there might be some new thinking on that. So
We
I'll
were
explore
told that
It
the
certainly would
location
be.
where the board member has to then be public.
Wow. Oh, both
So that we
locations
had
have
a
to be
board
public.
member who, winters in Florida and said, I'll just Skype in and no, because then you have to open your
Because
house.
we did have, actually Kristen, when we
Skype
had
from
Barbara
McDonald's.
Lee, she always wanted to call in and we were told repeatedly, no, that's not allowed. I'll explore
If
that
they've
further.
changed
It would
something.
be like, I think if we did it, it would be on an emergency basis, if, it would be difficult I think it would be difficult, but we might be able to do it if there were an emergency. We wouldn't want to do it.
I agree. I mean,
And you wouldn't want to do it
No.
because it's,
All right.
I just wanted to comment. I know my issues do not affect quorum, but I will not be able to attend on March 15th. I have something that I cannot get out of.
A huge Ides party?
And I know
How
I
many
have multiple-
nominations do you have?
At least 6. So I just wanted to state that.
That's a factor.
That's a factor.
All right, so the calendar is not resolved. Dan?
Well,
we're on time here to leave for the tour?
Wait, 5 minutes.
5 minutes to the
Let's
tour.
do our last issue, so.
I have one thing I'd like to
Please.
say. Last month, one of the originators of the programs that we participated in, Bill Murtaugh, died at the age of 95. And I think it's appropriate to remember an extraordinary person who, into his late old age, would show up at National Conference of SHPO meetings in Washington in the spring and urge us on to lobby to keep historic preservation funded and going forward. He was one of the early officers of the National Trust. Then he was a representative at the UNESCO, at the ICOMOS in Europe. And based on that, he was recruited by the National Park Service to help the Congress create the programs under the 1966 National Historic Preservation Act that established the National Register and all the devolved work in the states by the SHPOs. And then he was appointed, once that was signed by President Johnson, to be the first keeper of the National Register, and he had that job for many years. Then he went back to the National Trust and never stopped proselytizing for historic preservation in government and in the private sector. And so we remember a friend of historic preservation in Bill Murtaugh.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you. Michael, would you like to say a word?
I would just like to add to that, that I knew Bill, and Kath and I are old enough in this program that us, Bill is the only keeper.
Right.
Wow.
He was
Yeah,
the keeper.
right. The others are pretenders.
I would actually add to that too. He really, I think he actually wrote the NR criteria, or he substantially influenced it. And his vision was that it be broad enough to accommodate all kinds of, that's why it is so hard to challenge a nomination that is well written based on the criteria. I don't want to mention any names, but if you think back to nominations that may have been challenged, it is really hard to challenge a well-written nomination based on the criteria because they were so broadly written. And that is why they accommodate nominations that we do now that are for contemporary properties or special categories that weren't even conceived when the register was written.
Just one final item from Michael.
On your way out the door, I want you to congratulate Lynch. There's been a recently published book by Rizzoli on the houses of the Livingston family, which Lynch wrote a wonderful and lyric introduction. So thank you.
$85 will get you this
Motion to adjourn.
outrageously expensive book.
Whoa.
I will send you another memo about the calendar. I guess we'll put a little bit
Yeah,
more
we're gonna
thought
have to
into
talk,
this.
we'll do email conversation about the final
I'm
calendar.
sorry that, I didn't.
Because that's not resolved. We need
resolved, but
Jennifer Betzworth. Motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Jay first, Paul Stewart second.
Wait a minute, Jay?
Jay,
Wait.
Paul.
Paul?